Hello, test 1 2. Hi, can you hear me? Cool. It's just a matter of wondering if anyone can hear me, and if you can you send a heart up? Right. My name's Steve Speakman. If you can hear me, can you put a message up and just say that you can hear me? It's the first time that I've done one of these, so I'm not 100% sure. Well, I'm just gonna carry on talking until somebody tells me that they can't hear me. Someone said to me, or I was listening to something the other day, saying that if I was the only person left on the planet, that Christ would have died for me, which is very, very commonly said, and it's very a very common statement. But cool, thanks very much, Tim. It's a very commonly said statement, and very, very often used, and we treat it as a sort of flippant statement, but it was followed up by, if I was the only person left on the earth and Christ would have died for me anyway, I would have had to have been the person who nailed him to the cross. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. The guilt and the compassion that I felt, all mixed into one, was quite incredible. And I one of the things that I've been feeling on this Easter Monday is how much confusion must have been in the disciples' heads. Some of them have seen him, some of them haven't seen him, and hi Andreas, and the confusion about what has just happened, and what's actually going on must have been unbelievable. There's there was more than 12 of them. There were quite a number of people in and around his circle, and the confusion and the chaos that must have ensued. What with Friday, seeing this guy that you've loved and cared for and travelled with for 3 years, being hung on a cross for effectively no fault of his own. Then all the heartache and anxiety of the Saturday, and then two of you, a group, two or three of the women, come running back in and say that he's alive, he's risen, and it must have been horrendous. It must have been a mixture of elation and confusion, and we treat Easter Monday as a sort of relaxing day, and it was anything but relaxing for the disciples and the people around Jesus at the time. It must have been horrendous. Well, I'm because the majority of the people on here don't know me. I'm gonna go through my, so to speak, testimony, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life. I've got things written down here to prompt me, because those of you who don't know me, I had a stroke a couple of years ago, and things go out of my head as quick as they come into my head. So I've put some notes down to prompt me. I was the old joke. I was born at an early age. I was quite a precocious child. I was taken to Sunday school from the age of 6 months old, and I was taken there by my godmother, and I loved Sunday school. It was always a real part of my life that I thoroughly enjoyed, and one thing that was prominent with me was that I was taken by my godmother. My parents didn't go. My parents came to faith many years later, but I always loved going. I always loved Sunday school, and I would get picked up by the Sunday school bus, and taken to Sunday school, taken into church, and absolutely loved it. Even on Christmas morning, I would nag my dad at the age of 8 to take me up to the local hospital where the churches were meeting at 8:30 in the morning, and we go around the wards singing for the people in the wards, which is really weird for a kid to love doing things like that, but I did, and I was the only kid there, apart from two other girls who went, and they were taken by their parents, but I wasn't. I was just taken up by my dad in the car and dropped off outside the hospital, and then I went around the hospital with the other people. I was quite precocious. That's my eldest son, Caleb. I was quite precocious in my younger years. I nagged from the age of about 9 to get baptized. I knew what it meant. I just loved God. I was nagging constantly, and in the Baptist churches over here at the time, they had a rule that they wouldn't baptize anybody until they were 14. And I nagged, and I was nagging the minister and everybody. So they made an exception for me, and they baptized me at the age of 11, and then I did a stupid thing. The week after I was baptized, I went and stole an album from a shop. It was Hemispheres by Rush. I remember it quite well and quite vividly. I put the album in the sleeve of another album, which was Paranoid by Black Sabbath. As you can tell, I was into heavy rock very early, and I put the two albums into one sleeve and went and bought the one and went out, and I was caught, and my parents had to come and collect me from a police station. It was I think it was about 3 or 4 hours I spent in the police station in the cell, and it absolutely terrified me, and I regretted it ever since, and I've always told people, when you get baptized, it's one thing that you put in your head above the parapet, but you're also putting your head up there for people to see, but you're also putting your head up there potentially to get shot at by the enemy. And I hadn't stolen anything before. It was just a compunction that I had to have these two records, and I didn't have enough money for the both of them, and I wasn't willing to wait, and I stole an album, and that was my one and only real brush with the law, and it served me well, because it frightened me and put a sense of right and wrong into me that has carried me all the way through my life. I started preaching at the age of 13. I'd done certain things with the local Sunday school, and then at the age of 13, I took on the mantle of we'd done a youth service, and there was somebody supposed to deliver a message, so I delivered it, and I carried on from there, delivering messages and what have you. And there was one person in the church who said, you did really well today, you split the congregation into three. And I went, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you've got the people who just come and acknowledge, and when they go out, you had to meet and greet the congregation as they were going out, and it was a matter of there was one part of the congregation that would just say, lovely sermon, pleased to meet you, and get going, and then there was part of the congregation that would tell you really got me today, you really shot from the hip, and there was another part of the congregation that would just walk out and not speak to you, and he said, they're the people that you've most affected. So I noticed quite early on the people that I was most affecting. Skip forward a couple of years, and I was married by this point, and I'd gone to college and come back, and a load of people were hassling me about me being into heavy metal and having long hair and all that sort of nonsense. And I was getting extreme grief about it. So I don't overly recommend this, but I said to God, right, I want to know in the morning whether I'm supposed to be listening to this type of music or whether I'm not. And I went to sleep not really expecting God to answer in the morning, but I was so infuriated and so fed up of it, and the people telling me to burn my records and stop listening to rock, and it was really getting on my nerves. And I said that to God and went to sleep. In the morning, I had a phone call from a detention centre in Usk, asking me if I had any contacts for Christian youth bands, because they wanted to put on a number of concerts for Christian youth bands, and I gladly gave them the contacts, and I said to the lady at the end, where did you get my phone number? And she said, I don't know. She said it was just on my desk, waiting for me when I came in the morning. And I said, well, if you can let me know who gave you that phone number. And she never phoned back. The concerts went ahead in Usk, and they were very grateful for the contacts, but I never found out where and when the contact came from. But I've always taken it as God telling me I was supposed to be in this environment, and it's led true. I'm supposed to be in this environment, and I'm supposed to be working with the people that I'm working with, and I've been eternally grateful for God for that right up until today. I got married, and whilst my wife was expecting our first child, I went away to Glastonbury Festival on a missionary team, and we went away for about a week to 10 days, and the first couple of days I was Adeliza Mole. It's definitely a Welsh accent, and I'm glad you're it's good to hear it. And I was in this environment where they were teaching us what we were wanting to do, and different things, and they mentioned speaking in tongues. Now I hadn't spoken in tongues up to this point. I was about 26, 27, 25, 26, and speaking in tongues had always been something that I wanted to do, but it was just not something that I had done. I had to Ishmael from Uganda, and so I asked one of the guys, could he pray with me for me to speak in tongues, and he prayed with me in the afternoon, and nope, nothing at all. And by the evening, nothing had happened, and I'd sort of forgotten about it. It was just a matter of well, maybe speaking in tongues isn't for me, because it's for some people and not for others. And then at about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, we were all in our tents, and I was sitting there and or lying there, and I began singing quite softly to myself, and then I started speaking in tongues, and I would speak in tongues and then sing a bit more, then speak a bit more in tongues, and then sing a bit more, and unbeknownst to me, I was getting louder and louder and louder, and it ended up that one of the other guys in one of the tents shouted out to me, "We get it. You can speak in tongues. Now shut up and go to sleep." But I couldn't. I was buzzing, so I went up to the barn where there was a light on, and I had a cuppa up there and spoke to a couple of people, and there was one woman up there, and she said to me, "You're going to have 4 children," and I didn't know. Well, I knew I was going to have one, but I didn't know what the situation was. Yeah, I am Mark, but she said, "You're going to have 4 children, and one of them's going to be an amazing evangelist, and one of my daughters, who I'm going to speak about later, is she's bearing that out, and she's fantastic." But I then I had 2 daughters, and basically got divorced. I was in a marriage where my wife had an affair, and it was a matter of I needed to get out of the marriage, but I was torn, and I was torn on the basis that God doesn't overly like you to enter into a marriage and then not make it work. And I tried for a couple of years to make it work, but she kept going back to this other guy. And I was preaching up in Seven Sisters, which is just up the road from me in Neath, and I was preaching up there, and I audibly heard God saying, "It's okay, you can let the marriage go." And I was completely freaked out. I can still visualize exactly where I was. The church isn't even there anymore, but I can still visualize the crochet cross on the wall that I was staring at, and I was completely amazed by what God had said to me. And for a number of years I walked away from church. I was a deacon in my church. I was made a deacon at the age of 17, which seems incredibly young to me to make somebody a deacon, but I'd been asked 3 times, and on the 4th time I said, "Well, if you're that convinced that I should be a deacon, then okay, go ahead." And I'd been a deacon for all this time, and I gave up my deaconship, and and I came away from the church that I was part of. I never lost my faith, but I moved away from the church, and I just basically went into work mode. I was employed at the time by a bank, and I just went into work mode, and I went for a couple of years not going to church, which was really difficult for me. I still held up my faith, but I wasn't going to church. And then I met a guy in up in town, and he said, "Why don't you bring your daughters to our church?" And it was a different church, and I said, "Yeah, okay." And I started to go back to church again, and his name was Steve as well, and I'll forever be grateful to him for encouraging me. He encouraged me to come back to church, and it led me back into a church life, and I was talking to one of the girls who was in my working environment, and I said I go to church, and I invited her along, and subsequently she became my wife, which was another added bonus. But after a couple of years in that church, I'd told my wife I didn't want to get involved in anything, but we went to the annual general meeting of the church, and there was a guy got up and he said, I've had it on my heart to start an outreach group for youth, and I just felt this bursting in my chest, and I had to get up, and we had a group of about 6 or 7 of us, and headed up by Stuart and Dave and myself, and we walked the town for 7 weeks in a row, one night a week, basically on the basis of Joshua and his armies. Jesse, no, I'm not from Sweden, I'm from Wales. And not talking to any kids, just prayer walking for about 2 or 3 hours at a time. And then for the following year, we just walked around the town, speaking to youngsters and asking them what they'd want, where they'd want to go, what sort of facilities they'd like. And after a year, we hired a building, and it built up from there. And this was the formation of Sanctuary, and the formation of our Sanctuary in Wales. And I met Pastor Bob about 16 or 18 years ago, and we asked Bob, could we use the Sanctuary name, and he gave us the logos as well. So we continued to build, and we built it up to, on average, every Friday night we were having approximately 120 teenagers every Friday night in various states. We'd have them coming in to play pool and chat, and my wife was doing a Bible study as well, and it was Bible study come ethical study, bringing the Bible into it, because the majority of these kids had never experienced church before, and the one thing I can honestly say was we changed the atmosphere of the town. It was about 5 or 6 years into this, and there was a police conference in the town, and they were talking about the antisocial behaviour coming down and decreasing in the town centre, and it was firmly laid at our door. So I can honestly say that our prayer walks and our praying for the town and our work in the town honestly changed the atmosphere of the town. And I would encourage people to prayer walk their towns, because somebody said to me a long time ago that every step that we take for Christ is a step of light in a dark world. And I would honestly encourage people to prayer walk, even if you're just walking around your town centre, and if you're on your own, be praying, because you never know what circumstance that's gonna lead you into. Well, it's we continued doing this for quite a while, and the building that we were in basically kicked us out, so we moved back into the church, and the church at the time didn't overly like that, and we were we were actually asked to decrease the numbers, and I'm not a very subtle person, so I just said, how are we supposed to decrease the numbers? Tell everybody with brown hair that they're not allowed to come in? Tell every fourth person that we're not allowed to come in? And that sort of riled quite a few people up the wrong way, and it caused us to leave the church, and we left the church, and I didn't want to not go to a church, so I went to another church in town, who pulled me aside and said, we know what you're doing, and we know the circumstances of you leaving the other church, until such time as you find a building. Would you like to use our sort of office area to hold sanctuary? Which we did, and I was vastly grateful for. And subsequently, quite a few of the teenagers who at this sort of point in time, there were about 50 teenagers who were coming every week to church, and without us there, they said that they were being looked down upon. So they asked if we could form a church, and that's how Sanctuary Church was founded in Wales, and it was formed approximately 10 years ago, and it was amazing. We actively had 50 odd teenagers there every week. And at first I was just doing regular sermons, like the sermons that I would do for any other church. But then a couple of the kids came up to me and said, teenagers, came up to me and said, could you tell us the stories that we should have been told in Sunday school, like the one about the of you? And it amazed me that they hadn't been told these stories. So at the time, I spent about a year just going through biblical stories of the type that you would have generally been taught in Sunday school, but these kids didn't know them, and so many children these days don't know them, and it's a crying shame. It really is. So we became a church, and we a couple of years into the church, we were taking the church out into the local park. One year we did 13 visits to the local park in a year, and we would just do church in the park. We took our amps over. We had 50 odd teenagers, so it was fine. We just carried the amps and everything and the PA over. We had a live band, and we'd get great comments. There was quite a decent crowd would come and attend, and one time I was handing flyers out after the service, and I went to hand a flyer to this couple, and they said we don't want to take a flyer because we're pagans, but we've really enjoyed the music was good, what you said was good, and it wasn't any of this nonsense that is talked about in churches normally. So we were getting across to a number of people, and we, as the years went by, we got into the habit, or God led us into the habit of we would have a worship leader for a year, and then lose the worship leader, and the worship leaders wouldn't just leave us. They would go on to our first worship leader went on to become the head worship leader of the Apostolic Church just down the road, and he's still there. Our second worship leader, Karis, went off to sing with Malachi and subsequently with the Message Trust. Third worship leader went off to sing for the Message Trust band, Brightline, and various people would come in, have a year with us, and just go somewhere or other. So it kept us on our toes, and it kept us really busy. One of the things that my wife started in Sanctuary was a thing called Mission Hope, which was started out of necessity, because a number of our congregation were becoming hungry, so we'd start out giving food bags, and we built that up to becoming feeding the homeless 3 times a week, and it's now a registered charity, and we have a lady named Sharon who's running it 3 nights a week, not during this lockdown obviously, but we regularly get 30 to 35 people 3 times a week, and it's always staggers me the numbers of people that Pastor Bob deals with. We have difficulty enough getting volunteers and getting it all sorted for the 30 or 35 a week that we have, and Pastor Bob deals with hundreds a week. So my hat goes off to him and his mum, and we love Bob dearly. We've been over to see him and visited with him in his Nashville house, and it's a fantastic ministry that he's got. Not just the ministry with metal people, but the ministry in general. It's really fantastic. My family is, because this is a family chat. My eldest daughter is singing for a Message Trust band. Message Trust is an organisation based in the UK. They came out of the Worldwide Message Trust, at the Worldwide Message Band, and they work up in Manchester and around the Birmingham areas, and they go into schools and prisons and what have you, and they teach lessons and sing. And my eldest daughter is the lead singer of a band by the name of Brightline, and she's the evangelist in our family. She's doing work all over the place. My second youngest daughter is Emily, and Emily went to Nexus, which is a Christian university, and she studied worship and theology, and she's married now, and Lucy's married as well. My eldest son Caleb is hoping to go to Nexus. He plays bass. Emily sings as well, and he plays bass guitar. And I've got a little boy by the name of Eli, who's just gone 9 years old, and he's like a maniac, running around here constantly. But my wife Andrea is she's my rock. She's they always say behind a good man there's a good woman, and it's very much a matter of that with us. I couldn't do the things that I do without Andrea. She seems to think that she doesn't really do anything, but she does so much, and she's always supporting me, always encouraging me, and I love her for that. But Andrea suffers with bipolar, and we've had many an occasion where people, if she goes up for prayer for something in our church, they'll pray for her bipolar. They won't pray for what she's gone up for prayer for. They instantly pray for the bipolar, and it's a difficult thing when you've had prayer for something and God has seen fit not to answer your physical prayer, but God doesn't always answer prayers in a physical manner. In a matter of when the gentleman was lowered through the roof, he said, your sins are forgiven, which was the most important thing to him, and the physical impairment came later. So God quite often will heal, but he'll heal in terms of a spiritual matter rather than a physical matter. And I firmly believe that God answers prayers, but he doesn't always answer them in the way that we expect or want them to be answered. Well, Sanctuary these days is spread over Neath and Port Talbot and Swansea. We've got a sanctuary which is still going on in the church, and we've got a sanctuary which we tend to borrow buildings. So sanctuary once a month is held in Swansea in a pub, and we get some really weird looks because we show videos and then talk about them, and then I'll speak on something which isn't necessarily the normal sort of things that somebody speaks on in church. I've spoken about demons and angels, about where Christ went in the 3 days between him being crucified and in his resurrection, about the book of Revelation, about the prophets of old. We've even delved into the book of Enoch, and we get some really odd looks, and we get some people just joining just because they're curious. One time we were preaching, and 37 odd Japanese people came in, and there were a couple of people playing ping pong, but mostly the crowd was quite quiet. So what they thought, I don't know. And once a week, sanctuary is held in Mark Langley. More meetings should be held in pubs. I quite agree. I think a pub is an excellent place to hold it, because you can't stop other people coming into a pub, and they quite often will come in with varying attitudes, and we've had people coming in with all sorts of different attitudes, and it's great fun. It's been a little bit challenging since I've had my stroke. Sometimes I've had people being drunk and putting me off my stride. Sometimes we regularly used to have a guy that came and he had Tourette's, so he'd shout out all sorts of bits and bobs during the service, which would raise some eyebrows, and I'd have to qualify exactly what was being said. Yeah, it's we use a place called Gathering Place for one meeting a week, and or one meeting a month rather, and we use a church which is in Townhill, which is one of the roughest areas in Swansea, and we regularly meet there. But we meet there, and each of the services has a different sort of format, and we regularly get asked about that, and the format changes because it's to suit the people that come. For example, the format up in Townhill has morphed into a Bible study, whereby I'm not teaching directly out of the Bible, but leaving people read the bits of the Bible that I'm going to be covering, and then I put maybe a slightly different spin on it, a different take on it, show them or talk about what was going on around the time, because when one of the things with my stroke was since my stroke I've become heavily interested in biblical history and the history that surrounds the Bible, and I've found out a lot of things that make a lot more sense now that I know the history and the background to the Bible, and it's that sort of thing that I'm trying to show, and I've recently started a series going through the Bible on YouTube. It's under the Sanctuary Wales channel, and I've just done Noah, and Noah's one of my all-time favourite stories in the Bible, but it's definitely not a children's story. It's when you go into all the bits and bobs of Noah, it's definitely not a kid's tale, with all the horrendous things that he will have seen and had to go through. I mean, 500 years of being ridiculed and 100 more with building the boat. It was a crazy, inspiring story, and the greatest thing about Noah is that he constantly listened to God, and he was a fantastic listener, and he had an unwavering belief in what God was telling him, and that fascinates me, to be in a situation where you're constantly ridiculed, you're constantly made fun of, for your beliefs and for your for what you do. It's a phenomenal thing. It's a phenomenal thing to see Noah constantly going through this anguish, and yet coming out the other side as in a sense the victor, purely because he believed and trusted in God, irrespective of what was being said to him, irrespective of how other people believed. Noah stuck to his guns, and Noah stuck to God, and he was a phenomenal inspiration to me, and I just love the story of Noah. I've nattered now for 50 odd minutes. Is there anybody that's got any sort of questions? I don't know whether anybody will, but if anybody's got any questions out there, for me, pop them up on the screen, and I'll try and answer them. I'm no guru. I'm fallible, so goodness knows whether I'll be able to answer them. But if anybody's got any questions, now's the time. Michael, I've loved your testimony, brother. Thank you very much. Well, there's loads and loads more, but I've tried to keep it down to as short as short a time as possible. Taking nearly an hour now. But thank you very much for that, Michael. One thing that I didn't say, and if Constance, have a listen back, and Andreas, so good, thanks for sharing. Thank you for Pastor Bob inviting me on you. It's a great honour and a privilege. But it was one story that I was gonna share. When I went to Glastonbury Festival, I was quite young and quite naive, and I'd been to Glastonbury Festival quite a number of times, just on my own, so I knew my way around. And once my shift had finished, I went off, and if you know Glastonbury Festival, we camped up on the top of the hill, looking down at the pyramid stage, and you can go down into the valley of the pyramid stage and then right up on the opposite side, and there's a field called the Green Field, and there was a group of people who'd made a maze out of what was going to be fire, and they invited people to step into the maze, and then they would seal the maze up. And the idea was that you worked your way around the maze, and if the maze wasn't broken, by the time you got to the centre, you would have pledged your being to the god that they served. So I sat down by the side of this thing and started praying. And I halfway through praying, I realised that I'd gone completely blind. I just couldn't see anything. And I just thought the best thing to do is just sit here and just carry on praying. And I carried on praying, and then I felt a presence by my shoulder, and I heard these words: "You've won this battle, but but we'll fight you again." And slowly my sight came back, and I asked somebody what had happened, and they said that just before the people were about to get to the beginning, one bloke just ran straight out of the maze, and breaking the maze, therefore it broke the spell. And as I got up and I walked back to my camp, and as I was walking back up the hill to my camp, there were a load of people from my camp had seen me, and they ran back down to me, and they were asking, "Were you all right? Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And they said, "We got the message." And I said, "What message?" "Well, it came over the radio that Steve needs help, and can we all sit down and pray?" So we've all been sitting down and praying, and I don't know who sent that message, and nobody else knew who had sent the message, but the message got through. And whilst I was praying on my own by the circle, there were 30 or 40 people on the opposite side of the valley praying for me. So whenever we are praying and we feel like we're praying alone, I wouldn't mind betting that there's other people praying for us. because I was quite prepared in that moment just to go it alone. But God had other ideas, and God put me on the hearts of 30 odd other people to pray for me. And there's many a time when I've felt that I needed to just stop and pray for somebody. And if you ever get that feeling that you just need to stop and pray for somebody, I do it, because you never know what situation they're in. And quite often I've phoned people up and said, I've been praying for you for the past couple of days, and they've said, oh, thank you very much for that, because I've really needed it. So, well, my time is gone, and I've thoroughly enjoyed sharing with you. I hope you've enjoyed sharing me sharing, and bless you, Bob, and everybody for tuning in and having a listen and having me on the show. God bless. Bye.